Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Rachel Fishman. I'm the director of the higher education program here at New America, and I'm so glad that you could join us for today's conversation for what's sure to be a thought-provoking discussion followed by a well-earned scoop of ice cream. It is so gross out, so I thank you so much for coming in person, and you will be rewarded. And if you don't like ice cream, there's going to be wine and beer. And if you like all of the above, please take advantage of all of it. But before we get to that moment, we're going to talk about the future of higher education. And you might be here for that discussion, or you might really be waiting for the ice cream. But I promise we're going to make it worth your while. So higher education is under unprecedented scrutiny. America's colleges and universities, they've long been considered the best in the world, and they're known for attracting global talent, driving research innovation, and fostering a culture of shared governance and academic freedom. They're now facing sustained political attacks that threaten this very foundation of that reputation. Since the start of this year, a lot has been going on. We've seen a surge in executive and legislative actions aimed at colleges, from freezing their funding to targeting international students to investigating curriculum and student speech. And now there's also going to be sweeping changes to the federal student aid system through implementation of the budget reconciliation law. The implications of all of this for students and institutions are enormous. And yet, amid this turbulence, and let's face it, this hasn't just been one turbulent year. This turbulence has been going on for many years. We've found something worth holding onto in our data, and that there is common ground among us. In our nationally representative survey, when we asked Americans across the political spectrum what they think about higher education, they agreed on more than they disagreed. Republicans and Democrats alike see college as a path to career success, to gaining critical thinking skills, and to maintaining their civic responsibility to their communities. And despite these political divides about who should pay, we see large majorities of both parties believing that the federal government needs to invest more to make college affordable. Restoring trust in higher education takes work, and it will require higher education and all of us to tackle both accountability and affordability to restore that trust. In absence of that, attacks on higher education are able to land more readily. The recently enacted budget reconciliation law does make great strides in accountability, but it doesn't tackle the biggest problem we have heard time and again nationwide from Americans over the years in our survey. And that's higher education and the American dream are both out of reach because it is too expensive to pursue. Instead, this new law is going to undermine affordability by capping aid and cutting off key options for students. This is going to pressure state budgets in a variety of ways that will likely, from what history has shown us, will push the tuition prices higher. And that's why we think varying degrees is so important and why we think it matters, this survey research and this public opinion research in this space. It's now in its 9th year, and it offers policymakers a clear roadmap. Americans want a system that delivers on value, that's affordable to attend, and that's accountable for its outcomes. They're asking for these solutions to be rooted in data, not in rhetoric, and a higher education system that responds to the real needs of students, family, and the economy. Policymakers on both sides of the aisle have a responsibility to deliver upon that promise. Our hope is that this data can support more transparent, informed, and responsive decision-making in the months and years ahead. So before we dive in today's conversation, I want to thank the report's authors, Sophie Nguyen, Olivia Sawyer, and Olivia Checky, our esteemed panel, John King, Harrison Keller, Michelle Domino, and Adam Harris. And I'd also like to extend our deep appreciation to the Gates Foundation for their generous support of this work through the years. And I'm going to start with calling Sophie to the stage so she can tell us a little bit about the data.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Rachel, for such a warm welcome. So my name is Sophie Nguyen. I'm the Senior Policy Manager with the HiGET team at New America. And I'm also one of the co-author of Varying Degree 2025. So for those that not familiar with varying degrees, this is what I hope you can take away with. So varying degree is a comprehensive, nationally representative survey about Americans' perspective of higher education. In the survey, we asked more than 40 questions on a variety of issues in higher ed, including value, funding, and accountability. And our findings can be broken down by 14 different demographics, such as race and ethnicity, political affiliations, generations, and educational attainment. And as Rachel said, this is the 9 years that we have conducted the surveys. So 2017 was the first year. And since then, we have built a rich resource of data on public opinion about higher ed. So if you need to look for public opinion data in higher ed, please look into varying degrees. In 2025, we partner with our long-term partner in this project, NRC, at the University of Chicago to conduct the surveys. We fielded the survey in March, and the survey has its finding has a margin of errors of about 3 percentage points. New this year. So in the surveys this year, for the first time, we added new questions to assess how Americans perceive college quality and how confident they feel about colleges and universities. Answers to the questions get at what American wants out of higher education and what outcomes they expect students to achieve. We believe that these findings are especially timely at this moment, considering that higher education as a sector has been faced with tremendous pressures from the administrations, from lawmakers, and from the public, requiring them to change. So in the time that I have you today, I will just give you 3 main takeaways from the findings that we have from these news questions. First, we find that Americans broadly agree on the core roles of colleges and universities and what they should do for individuals and society. It's very clear that when it comes to college, Americans believe that skill training is important, but it's not everything. 9 in 10 Americans believe that it's important for colleges to help students become informed citizens and critical thinkers. And even when Republicans and Democrats agree on these questions at different levels, in the aggregate, we see that a majority of them believe in these educational goals for higher ed. And when it comes to what higher education can do for society, Americans across the board believe that higher ed, colleges and universities can work on a variety of areas, such as conducting research to advance knowledge, engaging with the community that they live in, and also contribute, providing a skilled and educated workforce for the economy. When it comes to campus climate, college being too liberal or left-leaning has been a major criticism for a long time, especially from conservative or Republican lawmakers. In our surveys, we find that Americans, when it comes to these issues, Americans are actually more split than we expected. When it comes to individual political views, Americans believe that 57% responded in our survey. So just a slight majority believe that colleges are more welcoming toward liberal views. And when it comes to exposing students to different ideas, Americans are actually split between whether they think colleges push their own views on students or encourage students to explore their own ideas. And unsurprisingly, we see significant partisan divide in responses to these questions. But I would like to note that even among Republicans, we have 30% of them, which I would say is quite a sizable number of Republicans still don't think that colleges are more welcoming toward liberal views or push their own ideas on students. And last but not least, even when we see public confidence may be declining or low for higher educations right now, a majority of Americans still believe that the benefit of higher education outweigh the cost. 80% of Americans are confident that colleges can help students succeed and get ahead in life, and they prepare students with the right knowledge and skill needed to succeed in the workplace. And they also are confident that colleges can provide a skill and trained workforce necessary for the economy, and that they conduct high quality research to help advance innovations and science. And that's all 3 findings I have for you today. The survey has so much more than that, and we highly encourage you to go onto our webpage by scanning this QR code, or go onto our website, newamerica.org, to find out more about our the result for our finding this year. You can use this explore the data functions to look at all the findings we have from all the questions we asked in the surveys, and look into how these responses different by demographics groups. In the next couple months, we will release more series of blog posts that do deeper analysis into other aspects of the findings that we don't cover in the main report, such as the use of AI in higher education, or the issues of accountability for higher ed. And but that is in the next couple months. For now, I think it's a time for the conversations that we have been waiting for. Without further ado, I would like to invite our moderator, Adam, and our panelists to the stage. Due to some scheduling conflict, unfortunately, President Keller will not be in person with us today, but he will join us virtually from Texas. So, Adam, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm gonna try it one more time. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. It's so great to see you all here on such a muggy day in DC. Michelle, John, thank you so much for being with us today. As I was looking at the data and reflecting on it, right, only about 40% of Americans agree that higher education is fine as it is, but about 73% believe that education after high school offers a good return on investment. So how should colleges balance that sort of market demand for difference? Or better put, how should institutions evolve, if at all, to meet the moment? Michelle, we can start here.
Sure. And thank you so much to the New America team for having me, and for the great work that you do every year to produce the Varying Degrees Survey. This is certainly a benchmark that I know a lot of us in the policy field really rely on to be able to guide our policy development work. I think that this is an interesting finding from the survey, because it does point at this really key disconnect in how folks are thinking about this. But I think, too, that there is a distinction in what we're seeing. It's not necessarily an anti-college or an anti-higher education message. It's more of an anti-status quo message, right? They're not satisfied with higher education as it is now, but they still see around them all of the many ways in which it is delivering benefits to folks that pursue it, that it's delivering higher wage outcomes, better jobs, after college, greater stability financially. So for institutions thinking about that divide, I think it's a really important moment to be able to show that you're not defending the status quo, that you are dialed in on how things have changed and thinking about the ways that you need to modernize your offerings, be responsive to what students and their families are looking for in their higher education experience today, and be able to embed those things in the education. We see throughout the findings in the varying degree survey this year that there are those career and skill training pieces that are so essential for students, but they also want critical thinking skills and communication skills. They see that all as tremendously valuable for institutions programmatically. How are they able to communicate that to their consumers and meet them where they are to show them this is what we're doing? We're not resting on our laurels. We're not standing on tradition. We're making changes intentionally to meet this moment and be able to serve you as best as we can.
I agree with everything Michelle said, and I would just add, I think this is a moment where the higher ed sector should be reflective about what are people frustrated about, and then what can we do about those things. Three that come immediately to mind. One is clearly costs. People are worried about costs. They're worried about the debt that students are carrying. So we have to have an aggressive affordability agenda. Now, at SUNY, our tuition for the full year at our four-year institutions is $7,070. So we're already very affordable, but we're focused on how do we make it even more affordable. This fall, we'll launch SUNY Reconnect, free community college for adults 25 to 55 in high-demand workforce areas. And we're seeing a ton of interest from folks by removing the financial barrier for them to college. So that's one where I think we just have to take the critique seriously. Second, we have a lot of Americans who have some college credits and no degree, and a lot of worry about completion. So we've got to take that on. We've got to say the students who start expect to finish, and we should be doing all we can to help them do that. At SUNY, we're scaling up the ASAP and ACE proven evidence-based wraparound support programs across our campuses. We have 25 participating this year. We'll go to 34 this coming September because we want our students who start to finish. And then a third area is post-completion outcomes, right? We hear the stories where somebody says, oh, my friend's kid, they went to college and now they're a barista at Starbucks. I guess it wasn't worth it. Now, we know that at the system level, the data show that having that college degree does better position you for the economy, but people are worried about that. They're anxious about that. Will that ROI be there for their kid, right? Not just in the theory, like, is there a good ROI? Yes, but they're worried about their own kid. Are they going to get a job? I always say, I have a daughter who's going into her sophomore year of college. She's getting a fantastic liberal arts education. I'm very excited about that. And I do not want her to come home and live in our basement. That's it, right? So an important goal for me as a parent is that there's a good job on the other end of this education. And we have to be honest. We can't say that that is true for every degree program. And I think, one element of the mega bill that is common sense is this new accountability measure to say if a program's graduates aren't earning more than high school graduates, students should be able to take out loans for that program. Now, devil's in the details. It's going to be complicated to figure out the data and exactly how to implement. But that common sense notion, I think, is consistent with what the public expects. And to the extent that we as a sector ignore that, I think we're going to miss an opportunity to address their concerns.
Yeah, you mentioned cost and ROI. One of the big places I saw a divide in the data was Democrats and Republicans believing that the federal government should spend more on higher education, or the government should spend more on higher education versus, the student, right, shouldering more of the cost because it is something that's going to benefit them. When I think about that divide, right, it really comes down to that: is higher education a public good? How do we start to bridge that divide, right? Where some people are viewing higher education in the same way that the founders viewed higher education, right? As a way to build good citizens, and others may view it as, a way to get a job.
Well, we have to say it's both, and we have to make sure we identify allies who can help us tell that story. The business community should be a much stronger ally. I've been disappointed that the business community hasn't been louder over the last few months as we grapple with that the questions that are being raised about higher education. And on the civic good, we need, whether it's local mayors, local legislators, to understand the work we are doing to prepare good citizens. We have to tell that story more fully.
And I'd like to welcome President Keller, who is on the video. Welcome, President.
Thanks. Sorry I can't be there in person to enjoy the ice cream.
I'll have an extra scoop for you. I wanted to ask you that same question, right? We're talking about this divide and that we've seen between Democrats and Republicans. It's really about what the purpose of higher education is, right? Whether it's public good, whether it is something that is more a personal good, right? You're at UNT. Chancellor King was just talking about the ways that SUNY is a really affordable institution. I think your tuition somewhere around $11,000 a year right now. Can you just talk about the ways that you view higher education and how you begin to bridge that divide between the public good and the private good?
Yeah. So I'm just finishing my freshman year as president at University of North Texas. But before I came to UNT, I was the commissioner of higher education for the state for about 5 years. And so got to work on these issues at the state level and then now here at the campus. First, just to underline a couple of key points that Chancellor King made, I think that we shouldn't shy away from these issues around the return on investment. What we found in Texas, when I was commissioner, Texas became the first state to condition our attainment goals on the value of credentials in our economy. So we leveraged the data and we looked into the data and asked the question, basically, are students better off for earning different kinds of credentials? If they're not better off, say within 10 years, we don't want to count those credentials towards our state goals. That was really important for setting the stage for a dramatic reform of our community college finance system that included about a 30% increase in state support for community colleges. Now, how were we able to achieve that? Well, it's because ultimately it wasn't just about driving more funding to community colleges. It was about jobs. It was about expanding opportunities in short-term programs, in associate degree programs, and bachelor's degree programs. And we were able to build a broad coalition of support across the political spectrum. So that bill not only passed unanimously on final passage in the state legislature in Texas, there were 0 amendments to that bill on the House floor. I've not seen that in 25 years. And for those of you who know, the Texas House is like full contact politics, right? I also now over here at University of North Texas, I've taken some of those same lessons. We're doing our own analyses of the value and the ROI of all of our undergraduate and all of our graduate programs. We're looking into that data. And what we see, first of all, is like, to your point about tuition, but I go even farther. When you look at the ROI, the average UNT graduate breaks even between 4 and 5 years in their investment in their undergraduate education. That's amazing, right? Folks probably don't know that. But I do have between 8 and 10 programs where it right now looks like it's longer than 10 years. So that gives us a sense of where we need to focus and what we need to work on to try to improve the return for the students and be visible about that. Like we shouldn't try to dismiss the criticisms and just talk about the averages. We need to say, no, we take responsibility for this and we're willing to take it on. I think that gives us a lot more credibility with students and their families. It definitely gives us a lot more credibility with the policymakers.
There's a little bit of tension at the moment, right, between ensuring students become critical thinkers and informed citizens and ensuring that they are job ready, right? It feels like people look at those as two different things when in some ways they're very similar. A few years ago, I wrote a piece that said basically the liberal arts may not survive the 21st century because even though someone can use a philosophy degree and apply it to various different fields, it doesn't map cleanly onto one job in the same way that mechanical engineering or electrical engineering might. But varying degrees shows that 93% of Americans believe that higher education should help people become critical thinkers. So, Michelle, I'm going to go to you first. How do we preserve that broader mission of higher education in a climate that is hyper-focused on the workforce outcomes of higher ed?
Sure. I think the data was really promising in this regard in showing that broad understanding across Americans and across political parties that we want higher education to do all of these things. And we think it does do all of these things. It is preparing our workforce. It is also helping them to develop critical thinking skills and reasoning skills and communication skills that they will need to thrive. So I think there is a sense that this is a both and not an either or, that those two things work in concert with each other. But I think that the workforce focus that has emerged over the last several years is also a reflection of very real financial pressures that American families are feeling. They are feeling the risk of their higher education significantly more because costs have gone up. They're seeing that outcomes are not always guaranteed to be positive from that system as it is, and that costs of living are rising in so many ways, right? So I think understanding that the hyper focus on workforce is also driven by all of those social pressures, that we have social safety nets that are collapsing. We have high costs of living, high cost of housing, high cost of healthcare. There's all of these things that are compounding to create a policy environment where, yes, higher education has to continually justify that it is preparing you for jobs and it's going to leave you better off and able to earn a good living after you leave. So I think that as long as those pressures remain, and a lot of that is outside the direct control of the higher education policy space, is so nested in everything else we're working with, that pressure to connect to the workforce outcome and be able to show the ROI is going to continue. So I think being able to balance that with understanding, yes, we need to lead with our outcomes. We need to be able to show how our programs are faring and be transparent and upfront with American consumers about higher education, but also thinking about how do we continue to be creative with how we embed all of these competencies that we view as core to the mission of higher education into our programs, into our general education requirements, making sure that our faculty are prepared to deliver those types of skills and train students to think in all of these broad ways and hear different viewpoints. And how do we make sure that that is something that students understand and are really feeling and seeing the benefits of?
And Chancellor, you're right in the thick of those pressures. How do you manage those on your campuses?
Yeah, I'd pick up where Michelle left off, which is that the general education requirements create a great opportunity to make sure that every graduate has that set of skills that we would hope for. And one of the things we're doing at SUNY is, starting with fall of 26, we've added civic discourse to our general education requirements because we think that that's an important area where we need to make sure every graduate is prepared. We also have an information literacy general education requirement, which we're now enhancing with a requirement that students are exposed to artificial intelligence, because that will be something that going forward, students will need to be able to navigate whatever career they choose. So Gen Ed is one way to do it. A second piece, I would say, is making sure that faculty across disciplines understand part of their job as helping students prepare for careers after they graduate. We have a goal at SUNY of an internship for every SUNY undergraduate. And when I talk to faculty about that, I make the point that that's really not for the engineering students. Like, they're all getting jobs when they graduate. I'm not worried about that. I am worried that for some of our students in sociology, in English, in philosophy, it may be harder. But if they've had that internship experience, the evidence shows us they are likely to get a job more quickly after they graduate, and they're likely to earn more after they graduate. So we've been fortunate to get, thanks to Governor Hochul, to have state funds to invest in creating more paid internship opportunities. We are working with partners all across the state. We're about to launch an initiative with local chambers so that they can help small businesses figure out how to have interns, because it's challenging to figure out how to make good use of an intern. Some folks are a little scared of 19-year-olds. Like, you're going to help folks figure out, like, what's the plan for how to make this internship work. The other thing we've done is we've launched an Empire State Service Corps, where we have 500 SUNY undergraduates who are paid to do 300 hours a year of public service work. So they're tutoring in K-12 schools, they're serving as peer mental health counselors, they're working on food and housing insecurity. So they're getting a internship-like experience doing service. It is paid. They're working alongside people who are different from them. So they're getting the benefit of the kind of citizenship development as well as the career preparation. And we had tremendous interest. In the first few weeks when we posted the launch of the Empire State Service Corps, we had 2,000 applications for 500 slots. Students want these opportunities. We just have to create them.
President Keller, I'm going to come to you in just a second, but I wanted to ask about that civic discourse class, in part because there are a lot of different institutions that do either civic discourse or patriotic activities in different ways, right? I was at the College of the Ozarks a couple of years ago where they have a director of patriotic activities and a vice president of patriotic activities, and every freshman is required to take a patriotic activities course, which is a mix of history and sort of military training. So what does your civic discourse class look like, and what are you hoping to achieve?
Yeah. So we're actually making it a competency that cuts across classes rather than a single class, with the idea that whatever students choose to study, they're going to be our future citizens who will be in charge of the health of our democracy, and we need to prepare all of them for that. And we've identified 10 faculty fellows, our civic engagement fellows, who are working with faculty to develop strategies for integrating that civic discourse work into their courses, again, across disciplines. So that may look different in a sociology class where debating maybe different views about an event in history is a little easier than in an engineering class or nursing class. But that still there are habits of, listening to understand what the other person is saying rather than listening to form your argument while they're talking, right? There are skills of how to have a good exchange of ideas, how to collaborate across difference that can be developed in every academic discipline.
President Keller, so that same question, sort of how does your institution, how do you sort of exist within that tension and sort of grapple with that fact that, like, right, the cost of living is going up. People are looking at tuition and saying, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay for that, or I don't know if that's going to be worth it if I'm not getting that job on the back end. How are you grappling with that sort of in your freshman going into your sophomore year as the president of UNT?
Yeah, well, first, it's important that we've got the perspective. So in the state of Texas, if you look at all of the net new jobs that have been created over the last several years, more than 90% of them require education and training beyond a high school diploma. So if you want a good job, you're going to have to do some kind of higher education. That could be a technical college, community college, university, but you're going to need some additional training. I'm in a unique context here in the Dallas-Fort Worth region. So University of North Texas is the largest university in the DFW region. It's growing like crazy. The jobs are expanding dramatically. But if you look at the most common credential that's awarded by higher education institutions across this region, it's a degree in general studies. It's a college degree in college. Now, so you want to talk about a degree that does not have a clear line of sight to either a job or to a clean transfer. It would be that general studies degree, and that creates a lot of friction for students. So I don't think so. Again, we shouldn't shy away from these issues. We need to lean in and take more responsibility for them. When I'm talking to employers across the region, across the state, what they're telling me is their job, their workforce needs are changing faster than they expected, and some of them will even say faster than they understand because of the rapid advances in AI across every sector. They want folks who can adapt to new technologies, but they'll also tell you they want people who can think critically. They want people who can communicate. They want liberal arts skills. All my degrees are in philosophy, right? I feel like I got a great education, and I'll always be indebted to the philosophy departments that gave it to me. But for our philosophy majors, I think it's going to be incumbent on us, if you're a student that needs to finish your undergraduate degree and get a job, then giving you the opportunity to have an internship or maybe embed a micro-credential that expands your options is something that's just a responsible thing to do. And that's going to give you a much quicker ROI. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to get a great education in philosophy or English or whatever your degree would be. But we can do a better job of being able to combine those with other things that are going to give you more opportunities and a clearer line of sight to be able to land a good job and have momentum into your early career.
Thank you. And also, as someone who's indebted to a philosophy department, I completely get that. Chancellor, you mentioned the one big beautiful bill, but it cuts roughly it cuts about $1 trillion from Medicaid over the next decade, eliminates plus loans, but it does tie college eligibility to sort of earnings outcomes. So the thought is that some of the higher education moves move us towards a more accountable system, move us towards a system that doesn't saddle people with unnecessary debt from plus loans. But does it also risk narrowing access and sort of punishing public institutions? And that's for anyone on the panel who wants to start. But Michelle, actually, I'll go to you first.
I think the question we always need to ask is access to what? Because access to programs that don't pay off for students, that don't leave them better off than they could have been without the degree, that don't set them up for success, that's not access that anyone is seeking when they enroll in a higher education program. So I do think that because of the variability in outcomes that we have seen, these are really important changes that will help us make sure that public dollars are being better directed towards programs that are paying off for students. I think that there's also a lot of opportunity around that to think about how we're intentionally improving those lower performing programs, right? This is something that the earnings threshold in the bill will not take effect right away. There is a ramp up period. You have to fail it for 2 out of 3 years. But I think it's a really important opportunity and a good moment for institutions to be evaluating all the programs that they're offering under that microscope of looking at how the returns are stacking up, where they want them to be for their students, and how they can be intentionally making improvements to those programs or closing programs where it's necessary. And in some cases, it will be necessary in order to better serve students and meet their expectations for what they're looking for in a degree.
I would say that the accountability provision, I think, has promise. Again, devil in the details in terms of implementation. I think the inclusion of workforce Pell holds promise. Short-term, high-quality programs that are stackable, that can lead students to successful employment outcomes, that's a good thing, and we should be for that. Now, devil's in the details on the guardrails and whether the guardrails will be real and prevent predatory for-profit institutions from taking advantage of that provision and stealing from students. So we'll have to see how that develops, but the idea of workforce Pell, I think, is a net positive. Now, the rest of the bill, the cuts to Medicaid and SNAP are terrible. They're terrible from a moral perspective. They're terrible from a public policy perspective. They will be terrible for our students in their day-to-day lives, and they will be terrible for state budgets, which will undoubtedly have consequences for public higher education spending. So that's bad. The loan changes, I think, are more complicated. I suspect that how it will largely play out is that commercial lenders will take up the space and students will pay more. Now, some students will be so discouraged when they realize what the bill will be that they will choose not to become doctors. And that's sad because we could use more diverse doctors in this country. And so if it is harder for a low-income student to see their path to becoming a doctor, that's bad for all of us. So I do worry about that, but I do think the consequences won't be as immediately clear as opposed to the original House version had cuts to Pell and Pell restrictions that would have been disastrous.
Yeah, and President Keller, right? As Chancellor King was saying, right, when Medicaid is cut, when there are serious cuts, states have to look to different places to make up that money, right? States can't just print money. So how are you thinking about that piece of it, right? Forecasting forward, it's not a given, but it is always the expectation that when there are cuts, higher education is cut. So how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so higher education for state budgets ends up being what feels like one of the few discretionary parts of the budget, because higher education institutions we can levy our own tuition, and so particularly with as you have pressures from healthcare on one side and pressures for public education on the other side. Those are kind of the Scylla and Charybdis of state budgets that higher education has to navigate. And their public health, public education are insatiable. Like you could spend all of the state budget on either of those. So we're going to feel continue to feel those tensions. It's going to be important again for higher education to be able to make a case for that we're committed to value. We are really the tip of the spear for economic competitiveness, and I would argue for national security. So we need to make a better case for ourselves, not as defensive. We need to be willing to take on some of these broader issues. I think it is a good thing that institutions are going to be needing to look into their data about are students better off for earning these different credentials. Most institutions in the United States do not have access to this data at all. And so it's going to be a massive effort to be able to provide the data that institutions are going to need to be able to work on these programs in a way that's going to be meaningful. That's not very general. I mean, so some of these details that John was alluding to, like, are we just evaluating credentials on the basis of students who've completed those credentials, or are we also considering that some credentials are important stepping stones to transfer or to earn other kinds of credentials? So we're going to have to work through all of those kinds of issues. The short-term Pell could be transformative. We did a version of that in Texas a couple of years ago, where we expanded access to state financial aid to our short-term workforce programs, and also provided direct state support for short-term workforce programs. What we've seen in 2 years is some of our community colleges have doubled their workforce programs. So these can be really powerful, positive changes to expand opportunities. But again, we're going to have to be very careful about how those guardrails are set on what kinds of programs can qualify and how we evaluate the value of these programs.
Michelle, what do those guardrails look like? Like, if you were to design the guardrails, what might the guardrails look like?
Specifically for the accountability
For short-term Pell.
For short-term Pell. Looking at, there's going to be an upcoming rulemaking this fall, and there will be the ability to have some of those conversations. I think, we really want to make sure that these are quality programs that are setting students up for success. And what we've seen so far with very short-term credentials is that they don't consistently deliver those outcomes. In some fields they might, in some schools they might, but there's a lot of variability in this space, and we don't totally understand those outcomes. So I think we need to get to that baseline of, what are the earnings expectations? Are you going on to earn more than a high school graduate? Because if you are not, that is not what any student is signing up for those types of programs. In terms of the way that the bill has designed this program, there's a role for governors to play in approving programs that will qualify for short-term Pell. What are the requirements we're going to provide for them to say this is how you should be evaluating the programs in your state to see if they meet those specific standards? What are the timelines that we're going to measure these outcomes on, since they are shorter term programs? And when should you become eligible, right? You have to provide data for a certain number of years in order to qualify for those programs. Are we allowing programs to enter that have not provided initial data and waiting 3 years to figure it out as to whether they should have qualified? I think that's incredibly risky as well. So I think those are some of the conversations where we really need to think about, what are we doing to make sure that students who are choosing these shorter term credentials, which are very appealing to students in a lot of cases, are able to do so, recognizing that the government has in some way verified that these are quality outputs that they can expect good things from.
Trying to look like you might have wanted to respond to that one a little bit as well.
I agree completely with Michelle, and I think President Keller raised a really important point, both in how we think about accountability for 4-year degrees and workforce Pell. We'll need to think about, is this a credential that's actually a bridge to something else? And at what point do we assess whether or not the student is successful? So you think about some of the programs at our institutions where to get the job, you need a master's degree. But you can't get the master's degree till you have a bachelor's degree. So now if we measure the bachelor's degree impact before people have the master's degree, we might miss that this degree is actually quite useful as a pathway to something else. We just have to be smart about that. With some of the short-term credentials, it may be that you need to get 3 of them in order to get the really good job. So are we going to evaluate them as a bundle, or are we going to evaluate them each individually? Part of what's going to be a challenge here, and President Keller raised this, states don't necessarily have great data on this today. Texas is probably further along than most. It's unclear to me who in the federal government is going to do this work, as there are half as many people working at the education department today as there were on January 20th. So how are we going to build this data infrastructure? Because if you build an accountability system on bad data, then you'll undermine people's belief in even the notion of accountability.
Excellent. President Keller, I keep coming back to this fact that roughly 8 in 10 Americans think that colleges at the moment prepare students well for jobs, but just over half believe that it's affordable. And we've talked about your 2 institutions and the sort of cost of attendance. We also, and this may be a media issue, right? Focusing on institutions that do cost a lot of money. I guess my question is about the perception gap of how much higher education is, how unaffordable it is, how unattainable it is versus the reality of there's an affordable community college. There's, sorry to mention another school in Texas, but UTSA and Texas State, right? I'll just and these were the institutions in my corridor when I was growing up. So again, how do you begin to close what appears to be that perception gap?
Yeah, we've seen this happening for years, where on one hand, to be able to get a good job, you increasingly need education beyond high school, right? And then on the other hand, what we see is I think we've seen this in the most recent surveys. We've seen this for a while. I don't think that it's so much a valuing problem. You've got this deep tension between that recognition that higher education does help you advance. It can help you expand opportunities, and then a concern about, is higher education accessible for me and my family? Is it worth the risk? So how we assess whether or not something is affordable is always relative to the value, right? And so I think one of the things that we need to do is sort of try to push beyond kind of this monolithic, is higher education worth it, or is college degree worth it, or something like that. And it's going to be sort of, we need to more focus on what's the value of different kinds of credentials. How fast do you break even on that investment? There are degrees and certificates that don't translate into much discernible value. Well, that's something that we need to take responsibility of it. It's probably something students and families need to know. There are things that it doesn't make much of a difference what kind of institution you go to, what your earnings trajectory is like. So should you take out the same level of debt to go to an expensive private institution as to go to your public college? Probably not for a lot of these, those occupations, a lot of those career paths. I'm a little concerned about what I see with higher education now. Of course, we're feeling like we're under assault from multiple directions. So we're sort of reverting to more defensive, kind of monolithic arguments. When I think, what I'm hearing from Michelle, what I'm hearing from John, that I agree with strongly, is that we need to defend the principles, but we also need to take responsibility for what we need to change, and make sure that the value is going to be there for students and their families who are going to invest in higher education.
Chancellor, actually the same question for you about the sort of perception gap and affordability.
Look, a couple observations, maybe to depart from the themes we've been tracking. I think part of the perception gap is between institutions. That when you ask people how they feel about higher ed, people are pretty mad about the Ivies and what they see happening there. And I think they make a pretty big distinction between that and their public institutions. I think if you ask most people in most states, and this comes through in the survey results, about their community colleges and their regional publics, they feel pretty good about them. They see them as a trusted source. That's who trains the teachers, the nurses, the folks who work in the advanced manufacturing plant. That's where they're coming from. And I think local leaders feel good about them. Community feels good about them. Now, you ask them, do you trust Columbia, for example? And you get a very different response. But we talk about higher ed as one thing, and the media tends to cover it mostly through the lens. Every reporter in the room knows I'm going to make this critique because I always do. Mostly through the lens of 5 institutions who get a ton of media coverage, and there's much less coverage for the bulk of the institutions that are serving the bulk of the students. So that's one, I think, place where the perceptions just really differ between institutions. The other observation I would make is some folks feel wronged by institutions. Like there was a 10-year period, maybe 15-year period, where predatory for-profits were stealing from folks, taking their GI Bill money, taking their Pell Grant money, leaving them with nothing. If you were taken advantage of by one of those institutions, you're probably pretty angry about it. And we don't really have a strategy for how to grapple with that as a society. Now, we've kind of gone back and forth about how we're going to treat the debt that folks have. But if you have debt for which you didn't get value, that's going to leave you deeply angry. And we have to do something about that.
Deeply angry and more likely to default on your loans.
Yes, yes, which then ruins your financial well-being generally, right? So, I mentioned that we're doing this free community college initiative. We're going to get many students in those programs who have attended other institutions, didn't get value. But now they see if they come to one of the SUNY community colleges and they get a degree in nursing, or they come to one of our community colleges and they get trained for a job as a technician at Micron that's going to build a big chip fab in the Syracuse area, it's going to be life-changing for them, for their families. So we're going to try to restore their sense of hope about the sector by delivering value.
One of the things that I've been thinking, I've been trying to put myself back in my shoes when I was a college student. Actually, not that long ago, I can tell you.
Tell yourself that.
Yeah. I have a reunion coming up. I don't want to think about it. I try to put myself back in my shoes. And I'm sorry to the administrators here. If an administrator or a board or someone said, hey, we're getting rid of a philosophy program, or we're getting rid of, something, I'd have been a protester. I'm going to be honest with you. And that degree program was how I thought about the value of the institution. It was like, I wouldn't want to be here if I had to major in math. I probably wouldn't have gotten anything if I wanted to major in math because I'm good at it. I can read the numbers. I just don't like to fudge with them. And so I guess my question is, if we restrict access to those credentials that we believe to have the biggest payoff or have a natural job at the back end, do we risk alienating some students who may have had an interest, but now since it's become like having to take, your chemistry courses or having to take your English literature, right? It becomes something you have to do as opposed to something you want to do. Do we risk alienating those students?
Well, I'm going to let President Keller take that one first.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I don't. Just be clear. I don't think we should shut down the philosophy departments, right? But I think actually it might go the other way. I mean, so it's really important, for a lot of students who become philosophy majors go on to law school. Or, there's a few of them that would want to go on and get PhDs in philosophy and become professional philosophers. That's very few of them. Then there's some of them want to get undergraduate degrees in philosophy. So, if we have a better sense of sort of what the goals are for the students, then we can make sure that our tracks in those programs are going to complement their goals. So if you're interested in law school, do we have a track that is going to, while you're completing your philosophy degree, that's going to help you set the stage for law school? If you're planning to complete that philosophy degree and go directly to work, then can we make sure we get you into an internship, make sure that we get you into maybe picking up a micro-credential along the way that just expands your options. Maybe you pick up a project management certification, which, by the way, I think we could all use project management, a little more project management skills. So that doesn't mean that I can't be a philosophy major, but it means that my institution needs to take more responsibility for understanding what my goals are, for meeting me where I'm at, and making sure that the path that I'm on has a clear line of sight to opportunities on the other side of that. Because what you don't want is students to complete programs and then they find out, well, I didn't know that these are the only jobs available to me, or this is what the earnings are and I can't pay my loans back, or students are struggling to find jobs. It's one of the things that worries me even about some of the degree completion programs for folks with some college and no credential that are general studies programs. Like, we can do better than that. And I think we have a responsibility to do better than that so that we can give folks a clear line of sight to meaningful economic opportunities.
And some of this also seems like it might revolve around the mentorship that they're getting as they're going through their college process as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, for one thing, we need to break down that artificial barrier between academic advising and career advising. So it shouldn't be just that your academic advising is just, here's all the boxes you have to check to complete your philosophy degree. But if you want to talk about careers, you have to go over to a completely different division and get a completely different advising. Like, with that, we can automate now, especially with the AI tools available to us, we can automate a lot of the advising that's about what boxes you have to check. So then we can do that more meaningful, kind of deeper advising where we combine academic and career goals.
And that requires a culture shift on campuses, right? Because in many departments, historically, the only students who were getting career advising were the students who wanted to go get a PhD in that discipline and be the next generation of professors in that discipline. They get a lot of advice, right? And the professor takes them under their wing and, one day you'll be here at this podium just as I have been. But we need faculty to think of part of the mission of our institutions as getting students to those good post-secondary economic opportunities. And so we have to help students think about, how do you apply for an internship? What do you need to do? I was with my daughter the other day, we're talking about, what's LinkedIn? What are we going to do? What do you put on LinkedIn? What kinds of things do you put on LinkedIn, right? I mean, these are
I asked those same questions.
These are important questions, right? So I think we have to have a culture shift so that faculty are helping students find their path. We also, I think, to just press on the philosophy point, need for departments to find their relevance. Look, I'm a strong believer in the liberal arts. I did my degrees in government or political science. But if you have no students, you have no department. And so if you have to have enrollment in order for the whole thing to work. Now, I will tell you, we have a philosophy professor at University of Albany who began his career studying trust between people. He now studies trust between people and algorithms. Trust between people and artificial intelligence. He has a ton of grant money, a ton of grad students, a ton of interest from undergraduates in philosophy and in computer science in taking his classes. So he's trying to make sure that the work he does is relevant to students and that they want to enroll. We need every department to have hustle about making sure that students take their classes.
Yeah, so and we're going to go to Q&A now. I think we're going to have microphones that will be coming around. If you can just raise your hand to maybe say who you're affiliated with, and we will go from there. A question up there.
Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Christine. I work at Bellwether, and my question is digging more into this like data infrastructure piece that President Keller and Chancellor Team both brought up. I'm curious to dig more into like where do you think then the responsibility lies? You're talking about how like the Department of Education has been cut tremendously. So is it on states then to try to build out their data infrastructure? Where did they get the funding for that? Like, I'm curious to kind of dig a little bit more into that piece.
Sean, you want to take it first? That's that.
Or
Policy, good policy question for you.
yeah, either Michelle or President Keller.
Well, a couple of that. This is one of the things we worked on a lot. Texas has incredibly rich data. We worked a lot. So we were one of the states where the governor prioritized higher ed for the more flexible GURI funds that were available, and we used some of that for infrastructure to modernize our data infrastructure. And there's still work that needs to be done, even as far ahead as we were able to get versus a lot of other states, and just being able to link all that data from public pre-K through K-12 through higher ed into the workforce. There's still work that needs to be done. So Texas, Kentucky, North Carolina, Florida, there's some of these states that have more robust data systems, but there's a whole lot of states that have a long, long way to go. The PSEO project at the census has been doing some really powerful and beautiful work. I would hope that kind of work could continue. We need better access to data about the earnings, about the wage trajectories that we can connect meaningfully to the educational data. I would like to say that you could just count on the states to be able to do it, but most states don't have the data infrastructures so that they could take this on themselves right now.
And I'd add, a lot of folks move between states. And so we're going to need data on the students who graduated from institution A that is in state A, but moved to state B for a job there. And so this is an important federal role. There used to be a bipartisan consensus that an important role for the federal government was data transparency. That was not controversial in the past. Now it is, but I hope we can get back to some bipartisan consensus. We actually can't implement this accountability portion of the mega bill without this data work.
And I hope that consensus is coming very soon. I think two promising pieces at the federal level. One is the financial value transparency framework that was passed through regulations under the Biden administration and has been maintained thus far under the Trump administration, which will unlock a wealth of data on student outcomes. And then the College Transparency Act, which is just reintroduced in Congress yesterday, bipartisan, bicameral reintroduction. It's been one of the most popular bills in Congress by co-sponsor count for some time. And that would overturn the student unit record ban, so allowing us to really get more granular data on how students are progressing through the system and how their programs are serving them. So hopeful that there will continue to be momentum in that direction, and that there will also be restorations to the data capacity that has been lost through NCES and IES.
Back here. And then I saw another one back here.
Hi, I'm Matt from the Council of Graduate Schools. My question is around future proofing. You talked a lot about trust and outcomes, but outcomes aren't necessarily a fixed thing. I work a lot with students that are thinking about graduate school now and just graduated. And the computer scientists, for example, are looking at a very different world now than they were 4 years ago when they started. So what's being done to make sure that we're still future-proofing these degrees and credentials and not becoming too excited about whatever the possible career of the moment is, to make sure these degrees have real value for students, not only when they graduate, but 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line?
This is part of the role of the general education requirements and the continuing role of liberal arts on our campuses. We know that students are going to have multiple different jobs, probably multiple different careers over the course of their lifetime. And so we've got to prepare them for that. At the same time, we can't use that argument as a shield from answering the question, did students get value? And I feel like too often it's a binary conversation where people will say, well, students are going to change jobs. They're going to need flexible skills. So let's not ask this set of questions about post-graduation return on investment. I don't think that makes sense. I think we have to both prepare students with that range of skills and ask that return on investment question. And if we build the data systems well enough, we should ask it not just 5 years out, but 10 years out and 15 years out.
Take the free culture change. So if you think about how most institutions have framed their work on student success over the last several years, student success is mostly about retaining students and getting them to complete on time. So at UNT, the marker we put down is from our first engagement with students through their time with us into their first job, into their careers, we need to take responsibility for that broader student journey. And so not just getting you to complete the degree and say Godspeed, but we need to take more seriously the idea that these degrees ought to come with extended warranties, right? Where we're willing to be a partner and we're committed to providing kind of additional opportunities for folks to keep their skills fresh, because everybody's going to need to reskill and upskill. But just to underline also the other important point that Chancellor just made, right? But we also have to make sure there's a strong foundation in our general education, in the humanities. Certainly, I would encourage all students to take more philosophy courses.
Oh, question back.
Thank you. Hi, this is Jenny Muñiz with Unidos US. I really appreciated the conversation around return on investment. And one thing it got me thinking was, what about, those degrees and institutions that have maybe had historically lower ROI, but are absolutely necessary for society? So we have degrees like teaching, right? On the one hand, we also have institutions like HBCUs, HSIs, which have there's some data to suggest they're lower earnings potential, but also have been historically underfunded and also serve more Pell recipients. So I guess the question for you all is, how do we do the very important accountability work while also addressing some of these issues?
It's going to be a huge data challenge, right? To be able to address those kinds of nuances. There also is, I think, a larger societal moral dilemma that we've got to grapple with. What we know, if we look at community colleges across the country, a lot of the programs that are going to be flagged are early childhood programs. Well, we still need people to work in early childhood settings. And my view is, if you work in an early childhood setting, you ought to make a family-sustaining wage. Right? The moral problem isn't that the community college prepared you for it. It's that society isn't willing to pay people in that industry what they should. And so we're going to have to grapple with that as we do this work on program review, because where would we be if all the community colleges in the state said, all right, we're going to stop doing early childhood? That can't possibly be the right solution. So we're going to have to go to governors and state legislatures and say, it's time to pay people fairly in early childhood. And hopefully campus presidents will be loud on that topic. And hopefully everyone in this room will be loud on that topic.
So one of the things we need to be careful about, that we definitely do not want to do, though, is you don't want to say, well, we're going to have this accountability and we're going to pay attention to return on investment, but let's exempt education and healthcare. Let's exempt things that are critical because we value them socially. So just think about what the message is that sends. That says that we're not going to consider the impact on an individual and what the value is to an individual if we have a need for that credential. That position is, I would argue, morally bankrupt. So instead, what we could do is we could say there are certain kinds of credentials that are really going to be important, and historically they've got lower wages associated with them. Well, what one of the easiest things to do is for us to subsidize those programs. When we do financial aid across institutions, traditionally a student is a student is a student, and you just look at sort of here's what the tuition is, here's what the total costs are, and you package those students accordingly. Well, maybe we ought to pay more attention within institutions, and we ought to make a case with the policymakers to say, look, there are some of these credentials that we need to lower the cost to students and their families. Maybe that's where we should focus more of our subsidies, because I know I've got credentials where students break even on their total investment within 36 months. I'm not, to Chancellor's point, I'm not worried about those students as much. I would be more worried about our social workers. I would be more worried about the folks who said, no, I want to go back to my community and make a difference, and they're committed to service, but there are going to be lower wages associated with that. Well, that's the kind of thing that we could address in a much more targeted way within the institutions, and I think we need to make a more focused case with our state and federal policymakers to get us on that.
Take one more. You have one up here. Oh, sorry. Oh.
Hi, my name is Kayla. I work at Lumina. And I guess my question is kind of a follow-up to this one. But basically, in the current phase, we're kind of facing a perfect storm with these accountability measures as they're coming in at a time when funding for like Medicaid and SNAP is being cut. So states will have to put more funding towards that, which necessarily means less funding for education, therefore more expensive programs. And so the return on investment will be even worse, especially for those institutions that have been chronically underfunded. And so how do you make that case to policymakers? Like, okay, I think subsidizing programs seems like a pretty good idea, but if it's almost a fight to like keep tuition from rising in general the next year, how do you make that case? Like, how can higher education make that case? And how can other sectors work to help higher education make that case?
I think so. At least I look at our experience that you can get policymakers on board with loan repayment programs. You can get policymakers on board with targeted scholarships, even and sort of these more precise kind of strategies. I think you just have to connect the dots of like, here's what our workforce needs are like. Here's what, we need to be able to produce these credentials. And I think I am optimistic that that's the kind of thing that you can build a broad coalition around, because I've seen, at least in our context in Texas, where you could get that broad coalition of very conservative Republicans, very liberal Democrats, all coming together to say, yeah, we need more math and science teachers. So let's put some focused resources around that. Those kinds of things, are early childhood education workers.
I think too, with so much austerity across the federal and state budget landscape, it is a prime opportunity to think about where there are innovative levers that we have not doubled down on in the way we might be able to in higher education. And is this an opportune moment to really look at those? I think certainly thinking about cross-subsidization of programs, of differential tuitions, programs that might be able to kind of target more broadly where there are areas of demand and need. I hope also there will be more engagement with employers around employer partnerships, what the role of local employers can be in supporting the training for some of those skilled workforce development programs, and then thinking about apprenticeship models, thinking about other ways that we deliver this training in a way that is consistent with employer needs and is able to help offset the costs in different ways.
And look, I think the data in the survey supports what President Keller and Michelle were just saying, that there's a public appetite for investment that will make college more affordable. And there's a public belief that college can be a vehicle for helping people get economic opportunity and better jobs. So if you're a governor, it seems like there's a lot of goodwill that you could tap into with the public. And I will say this, our free community college initiative in high demand workforce fields, people love it. Not only the prospective students who are going to benefit from it, but employers are excited about it because they know they have open positions. They can't fill them because they don't have folks with the skills. This is a solution to that problem. So I think this really could be an opportunity for governors and state legislatures to lead.
The final question up front.
So I'm the former chancellor of North Dakota, retired after 10 years. And we have a powerful big state here. We have a powerful big state on here. But, the hinterland, the Dakotas, Montana, low population, to get to scale on the AI question, infrastructure is very difficult. And I want to thank Chancellor King because you let your experts talk to ours about your Empire AI, and I know they're still working on that. But any thoughts on the administration, which is rolling out massive, multi-$100 billion AI initiatives? Is there any registering the fact that they might need to have more federal funding to support the smaller population states, the rural areas, from Vermont to the Dakotas, they can't get to scale on their own and don't have the business infrastructure, like the partners you've assembled are incredible, IBM and Intel and all this. Any thoughts on that from the big states here? Thank you for letting me ask that last question.
No, it's a great question. Look, I'm worried that the sort of anti-research discourse that we see is a threat to the higher education sector generally, but it's particularly a threat to public institutions in smaller states because there's no place else to go but that federal investment. What we're doing with Empire AI, and this is a project where we're investing now approaching $500 million in computing capacity at University of Buffalo, which is one of our SUNY campuses, where researchers at our 4 research universities, as well as private institutions, NYU, RPI, Cornell, they'll all be able to access this supercomputing power to research questions that leverage AI for the public good. So think of it as almost like a public option in AI, so people don't have to only rely on Meta and Google. And a way that you can look at questions like how can we use AI to better treat disease, to analyze weather patterns, to predict extreme weather events, so forth. So we're very excited about it, but New York has the resources to do that. For a smaller state, it would have to be the federal government playing a key role. And, I get that the current administration has skepticism about how research dollars are used. They have different research priorities. But things like AI, quantum, if we don't lead, China will. And so there's a real national security interest that should be bipartisan in setting aside the culture wars and making big bets on research in these areas and mobilizing talent everywhere in the country, not just in the big states, but in every state.
Even if you think about really large, powerful institutions or large, powerful states, things are moving so fast in AI that no institution can go it alone right now. So a lot of the AI programs that are being stood up, centers of work that are being stood up, I think are doomed to fail because they're set up on a sort of conventional model where institutions are trying to develop their own capabilities and their own programs by themselves. It's moving too fast for us to do that. So the only way that we're going to be able to be competitive, as the Chancellor alluded to, is we've got to work across networks of institutions, networks across state lines, where we leverage computing power, we leverage the capabilities of faculty across multiple institutions to be able to move faster. That's the only way that we're going to be able to keep up. And those networks, it's critical that it's not just higher education institutions, but it's in very close partnership with industry, because they're also struggling to keep up just as much as we are in higher education.
Well, thank you so much for that question. Thank you for that answer. I'm going to release you all shortly to get your ice cream. But before I do, just like to thank our panel for a fantastic conversation. And thank you all for joining us today.